The slap cracked through the cabin like thunder in a sealed sky. It wasn't loud because of force. It was loud because of silence. 1 second the plane hummed with its usual fake peace, engines whispering, air vents breathing, seatbelts clicking into place. The next second, sound stopped meaning anything at all. Every head turned at once, not out of curiosity, but instinct. Something had gone wrong, something human. Row 18 froze in time. A black man sat stiff in his seat, his face turned just slightly to the right, eyes wide but not wild. Not angry, not panicked, just stunned. Like someone had knocked on his soul without warning. His cheek burned, not just from the slap, but from the weight of being seen. Seen like this, in public, in the air, trapped. Standing over him was the flight attendant. Her chest rose and fell fast. Her jaw was tight. Her hand hovered mid-air, fingers curled like they didn't yet believe what they'd done. There was a second where even she seemed unsure if the moment was real. Then her voice cut through the shock, sharp and defensive, loud enough to make sure everyone heard her version first. "Do not raise your voice at me." Her words bounced off the walls of the cabin. They landed on strangers' ears, on cameras already lifting, on a woman clutching her purse, on a man pretending to read his phone while recording anyway, on a child who started crying because children feel tension before they understand it. But the man hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even sighed loudly. He had asked for water. That was it. Not rudely, not sharply. Just a simple request made after 40 minutes on the tarmac, when the air felt stale and his throat felt dry. He had waited his turn. He had smiled when she passed. He had said please. That part didn't matter now. The cabin filled with whispers, the kind that pretend to be quiet but aren't, the kind that carry judgment without names. Someone muttered, "What happened?" Someone else said, "I think he yelled." Another voice, low and certain, said, "They don't just do that for no reason." The man stayed still. That's what surprised people most. He didn't jump up, didn't curse, didn't threaten, didn't reach for her or for anyone else. His hands stayed exactly where they were, open, visible, resting on his thighs like they had been trained to do their whole lives. He took a breath, slow, deep, controlled. The kind of breath someone takes when they know reacting the wrong way could cost them more than dignity. It could cost them safety. He turned his face forward again, straightened the lapel of his jacket with careful fingers and looked ahead. Not at her, not at the phones, not at the people already deciding who he was. Then he spoke, quietly, calmly. 6 words that didn't rise or fall. They didn't beg, they didn't threaten, they simply existed. "You just made a terrible mistake." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The words didn't sound dramatic. That's what made them heavy. They didn't sound like a warning shouted in anger. They sounded like a fact being noted for the record. The flight attendant laughed. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't unsure. It was sharp, dismissive, practiced. "You people always say that." The cabin tightened. The air felt thicker, like it had weight now. A few people inhaled at the same time, not because they needed oxygen, but because they felt the moment shift from incident to something else. Something older, something familiar. The man's jaw tightened, just a little. Not enough to be called anger, enough to show he heard her, enough to show the words landed where they were meant to. Somewhere deep, somewhere bruised. A woman across the aisle looked down at her hands. A man in the aisle seat leaned back like distance might protect him from guilt. Someone whispered, "Did she really say that?" Someone else whispered, "He shouldn't have said anything." The plane felt smaller now. Not because of the seats, because of fear, because of the unspoken agreement that had just been broken. The agreement that said everyone would pretend not to see things like this, as long as it didn't happen to them. The flight attendant crossed her arms, reclaiming her space, her authority. She stood tall, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Uniform crisp, badge shining, power stitched into fabric. "You're causing a disturbance," she said. "I'm going to need you to calm down." The words were almost funny. Almost. Because the only raised voice in the last 30 seconds had been hers. The man didn't answer right away. He looked at the seat in front of him, at the safety card, at the tiny screen that still showed the airline logo like nothing was wrong. His reflection stared back faintly in the dark glass. He looked tired. Not old, just tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. A child 2 rows up kept crying. The mother tried to soothe him, whispering, rocking, apologizing to everyone around her like the tension was her fault. The sound made the moment worse. "Roar, human!" A man behind row 18 leaned forward. "Hey man, just let it go," he said softly. Like advice. Like survival tips. Like this wasn't a slap but a weather delay. The man in row 18 nodded once, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. He understood exactly what was being asked of him. Silence, submission, forgetting. He had done that before, more times than he could count. In stores, in meetings, in places where asking for too much meant being labeled a problem. He knew the rules, knew them well. But something about the slap lingered. Something about the way it echoed. Something about the word, "you people." He reached into his jacket pocket. A few passengers stiffened. Phones rose higher. Someone gasped quietly. The movement wasn't sudden. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, slow enough to show there was no threat, purposeful enough to show he knew exactly what he was doing. His fingers brushed past his wallet, past his phone. He didn't pull anything out. He simply pressed the call button above his seat. Ding! The sound was soft, almost polite, but it cut through the cabin sharper than the slap had. The flight attendant blinked. "What are you doing?" she asked. Calling for assistance, he replied evenly. Her mouth tightened. "Sir, I'm already assisting you." "No," he said, still calm. "You're not." The light above his seat stayed on, a small blue glow, a signal, a marker, proof that something was unresolved. People waited for security to rush in, for hands to grab his arms, for someone to tell him he needed to deplane. That's how these stories usually went. Everyone knew the ending before it happened. That's why no one intervened. But nothing happened. Not yet. The flight attendant stood there, unsure now, eyes darting toward the galley, toward the front of the plane, toward witnesses she hadn't expected. "Sir," she said again, lower this time, "you're making this worse." The man met her eyes for the first time. Not with hate, not with fear, with something steadier, something heavier. "No," he said, "you did." The cabin held its breath. Somewhere near the back, a man whispered, "Oh no." Somewhere near the front, a woman whispered, "Good." Somewhere in between, people realized this wasn't going to end quietly. The call light stayed on, the engines kept humming, and everyone on board felt it, even if they didn't yet understand it. This flight wasn't just going to cross states. It was crossing a line people pretended didn't exist. A line drawn by power and silence and who was allowed to be hurt without consequence. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. They came back together, not one by one, but as a unit, like reinforcement, like proof that whatever story was about to be told would be backed by uniforms and confidence. Two flight attendants walked slightly behind her, faces tight, eyes already settled on the man in row 18. Behind them came a supervisor, taller, broader, badge clipped neatly to his chest. Authority had arrived, and it arrived already decided. She spoke first, quickly, before anyone else could frame the moment differently. "He was aggressive," she said, loud enough to travel. "He made me feel unsafe." The word unsafe floated through the cabin like a flare. It didn't need explanation. It didn't need proof. It had power all by itself. Heads turned again, almost on instinct. Eyes landed where they were guided, on the black man still seated, still calm, still breathing slowly like he was counting every second. Unsafe. The word had history. It had weight. It had ended lives. He didn't move when they surrounded his row. He didn't shrink either. His hands stayed open on his lap, palms visible, fingers relaxed but steady. He looked up at the supervisor, then at the two attendants flanking him, then back to the woman who had slapped him. His voice came out level, almost soft but clear enough to cut through the hum of the engines. "I asked for water," he said. "She slapped me." No yelling, no shaking. Just a sentence, clean, simple, honest. The supervisor didn't respond right away. Not because he was thinking, because he didn't need to. He didn't ask for details. Didn't turn to the attendants behind him, didn't glance at the overhead cameras that watched everything but rarely spoke. He didn't even look the man fully in the eye. He looked past him, like the decision had already been made somewhere else. "Sir," he said, voice clipped, practiced, "we're going to need you to comply." The word comply landed wrong. Heavy, sharp, empty. Comply with what? Sitting, breathing, swallowing disrespect without choking on it? The man blinked once, slowly. He felt his wife's hand tighten around his, nails pressing into his skin like an anchor. Her voice came barely above a whisper, but he heard it like it was shouted into his chest. "Please," she said, "not again, again." The word pulled him backward through time whether he wanted it to or not. Airport terminals, where he'd been stopped while others walked past. Boardrooms, where his ideas were ignored until repeated by someone else. Streets where sirens felt personal. Courtrooms where his tone mattered more than truth. Again meant pattern. Again meant survival. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some stared hard at their screens, pretending this was none of their business. Some watched openly, eyes wide, recording quietly like witnesses who weren't sure if they'd ever be called to testify. A few shook their heads, not in protest, but in discomfort, the kind that wants the moment to end without asking how. The attendant who had slapped him crossed her arms. She stood a little taller now, chin lifted, shoulders back. Her face carried something close to relief. Backup had arrived. Authority had validated her fear. Her version was now official. "You should have stayed quiet," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for him to hear. He looked at her then, really looked, not with anger. With something closer to sadness, like he was seeing a familiar shape wearing a new face. The supervisor cleared his throat. "Sir, if you don't calm down, we may have to remove you from the aircraft." "Remove." Another word with a long shadow. "I am calm," the man said. "I was assaulted." The supervisor's jaw tightened. "This isn't the time for accusations." Accusations. As if the red mark on his cheek was a rumor. As if the witnesses weren't real. As if truth needed permission. A woman across the aisle raised her hand halfway, then let it fall. She had seen the slap. Her mouth opened like she might speak, then closed. Her eyes darted to the supervisor's badge, then back to her lap. Silence won. The man felt it then. The shift. The moment where a situation becomes a story that will be told wrong if he doesn't stop it. The moment where the crowd decides who is believable. He squeezed his wife's hand once, gently like a promise. Then he loosened his grip and stood. Slowly. Deliberately. No sudden movements, no raised arms. He rose the way someone does when they know the room is watching for a reason to fear them. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, "Sit down." Someone else whispered, "He shouldn't have done that." He stood anyway. "I'm standing," he said calmly, "so you can hear me." The supervisor took a half step back without realizing it. The attendant stiffened. The slap mark on the man's face felt hot now. Not from pain, but from exposure. Before the supervisor could speak again, the intercom clicked. A soft tone. Then the captain's voice filled the cabin, smooth and controlled, trained to calm turbulence and fear. "Is there a situation we need to be aware of?" The words cut through the tension like light through cloud cover. For a second, no one answered. The flight attendant glanced at the supervisor. The supervisor glanced toward the cockpit. The moment stretched, fragile and uncertain. "Yes," the man said. His voice carried. Not because he raised it, because the cabin leaned in. "There is." The captain didn't respond right away, but the tone of the room changed. Someone had finally asked a question that wasn't an order. Someone with real authority had noticed. The man stayed standing. His posture was straight but not rigid. His face was calm but not blank. He felt his heart beating in his chest, steady and loud, like it was keeping time for something important. "I was slapped by a flight attendant after asking for water," he continued. "I have not raised my voice. I have not threatened anyone. I am being told to comply without being heard." The words hung there, clean, measured, impossible to twist without effort. The supervisor opened his mouth to interrupt, then closed it. The intercom crackled softly, like the captain was listening closer now. "Captain," the supervisor said quickly, trying to regain control, "we have a passenger who became aggressive toward our crew." The man shook his head once. Slow, visible, clear disagreement. "I became visible," he said. "That's not the same thing." A murmur moved through the cabin, not loud, not unified, but present, a shift from fear to awareness. The captain's voice came back, firmer this time. "I'm stepping out." The words landed like gravity returning. The flight attendant's face lost some color. The supervisor straightened, his jacket. "Authority always looks confident until it's questioned." The man sat back down slowly, hands returning to his lap. He hadn't won anything yet. He knew that. This wasn't victory. It was just the first crack in a wall built long before this flight. His wife exhaled shakily, tears finally breaking free. He squeezed her hand again, grounding her, grounding himself. The cabin buzzed now, not with engines, with anticipation. People felt it. Something was changing, not resolved, not safe, but exposed. The call light above row 18 still glowed, and as footsteps approached from the front of the plane, everyone on board understood one thing clearly. This was no longer about water. or a slap, or even a flight. It was about who gets believed when power speaks first, and the answer hadn't come yet. The captain stepped out of the cockpit with the kind of calm that only comes from someone used to pressure. Not rushed, not alarmed. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, his face unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, observing, measuring. He didn't look at the man in row 18 first. He didn't look at the flight attendant either. He looked at the cabin as a whole, like a doctor walking into a room where everyone was talking at once and trying to figure out who was bleeding. "What's going on?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Authority doesn't shout when it knows it will be obeyed. The supervisor opened his mouth immediately, eager, ready to retake control of the story. "Captain, we have a—" Before he could finish, the man in row 18 spoke. Not loudly, not angrily, just clearly, like someone stepping into light after being pushed into shadow for too long. "My name is Marcus Hill," he said. The sound of his name seemed to slow the room. People leaned forward without realizing it. Even the engines felt quieter somehow. And before this flight took off, he continued, pausing just long enough for the words to land. "I bought it." For a moment, no one reacted. Not because they didn't hear him, because their brains rejected it. The sentence didn't fit the picture they had already painted. It didn't match the role they'd assigned him. It didn't make sense. Then silence dropped hard. Heavier than turbulence, heavier than the slap, heavier than fear. The supervisor let out a short laugh, a scoff meant to dismiss. "That's not funny," he said. "Sir, this is serious." Marcus nodded once, calm, patient, like someone used to being doubted. "I agree," he said. "It is." He reached into his jacket again. This time, no one gasped. No one whispered. Everyone watched. He pulled out his phone and unlocked it with steady hands. No rush, no shaking. He scrolled once, then twice, then held the screen up so the captain could see a contract, pages of text, a digital signature at the bottom, and a company name that made the supervisor's face change before the captain's even did. The captain stepped closer, just one step, enough to read, enough to recognize. His eyes widened, then narrowed, his jaw tightened. The color drained slowly from his face, like realization was pulling it away. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't a man trying to scare his way out of trouble. This was the principal investor behind the airline's newest expansion deal. The one announced in a press release just weeks ago. The one that promised new routes, new planes, new profit. The same man the CEO had personally thanked in a meeting last week. The same name printed on briefing documents the captain had skimmed but never imagined he'd meet like this. Phones lowered, one by one, slowly. People realized they were no longer watching a spectacle. They were witnessing a reckoning. The flight attendant's face changed. The tight confidence cracked. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed together. Her eyes darted from the phone to the captain to Marcus. The smile she'd worn like armor slipped completely away. Marcus lowered the phone but kept speaking. His voice didn't change. That was the most unsettling part. "I didn't stand up because I'm powerful," he said. "I stood up because I'm human." The words moved through the cabin like a current. They didn't accuse. They didn't threaten. They told the truth. "I didn't say my name earlier because it shouldn't have mattered," he continued. "I didn't show this contract earlier because respect shouldn't depend on it." The captain swallowed. He turned slowly toward the flight attendant. His voice was different now, still calm, but sharper, focused. "Did you strike a passenger?" he asked. The question hung there, simple, direct, impossible to dodge. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I was under stress," she said quickly. "He made me feel unsafe. I thought he was going to—" Marcus shook his head. "Just once, not angry, not dramatic. Final. You weren't afraid of me," he said. "You were comfortable disrespecting me." That sentence hit harder than anything else he'd said, because fear can be defended. Comfort cannot. The captain looked back at Marcus, then at the supervisor, then around the cabin, at the witnesses, at the faces now flushed with shame, curiosity, regret. "I need statements from everyone involved," the captain said, "and we will review the footage." The supervisor's shoulders sagged just slightly. Authority slipping, the story unraveling. The flight attendant's hands trembled now, not with anger, with realization, with the sudden understanding that power doesn't always sit where uniforms say it does. Marcus sat back down slowly, not because he was told to, because he chose to. His wife stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time all over again. Pride mixed with fear mixed with relief. She squeezed his hand harder this time. The captain nodded at Marcus, a small gesture, respectful, quiet. Then he turned and walked back toward the cockpit, already speaking into his radio. The cabin buzzed again, but it was different now. Not whispers, not judgment. Something closer to awe, something closer to discomfort. People avoided Marcus's eyes, not because he'd done something wrong, because they'd done nothing, at all. The flight hadn't taken off yet, but the balance had shifted, permanently, not through rage, not through threats, but through truth. And everyone on board felt it, because once truth changes altitude, nothing looks the same from above. The plane did not take off on time. That alone felt strange, because flights were built on schedules and control, on the promise that nothing human would interrupt the machine. But this one sat still at the gate, engines quiet now, like it was thinking about what had just happened. People checked their watches. Some sighed. Others didn't mind the delay at all, not after what they had seen. The flight attendant was escorted off quietly. No shouting, no handcuffs, no raised voices, just a calm request and a slow walk down the aisle she had ruled minutes earlier. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, a sound that felt louder now than it ever had before. She didn't look at Marcus. She didn't look at the passengers. She stared straight ahead, face pale, shoulders stiff, as if holding herself together required all the strength she had left. The irony sat heavy in the cabin, the same calm, the same respect. The same careful handling Marcus had been denied. People watched her go, not with joy, not with anger, but with something closer to reflection. Some felt relief, some felt guilt, some felt exposed. No one clapped, no one spoke. The silence did all the talking. An announcement followed soon after. The captain's voice again, smooth, professional, wrapped in the language companies use when they know they are being watched. Apologies were offered, delays were explained. Procedures were promised. Words like incident and review floated through the cabin, neat and clean and distant from the sting still burning on Marcus's cheek. Damage control dressed up as accountability. Marcus didn't react. He didn't nod. He didn't frown. He didn't lean back like someone who had just won. He simply sat there, holding his wife's hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on her knuckles. She leaned into him now, her head resting against his shoulder, finally allowing herself to breathe. Her tears came quietly, soaking into the fabric of his jacket. Not tears of fear anymore, tears of release. Marcus looked out the window. The sky beyond the glass was pale and open, stretched wide like it didn't care about human rules at all. He stared at it not because it was beautiful, but because it was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything else. Passengers stole glances at him. Some looked away when he caught them. Others held his gaze for a second too long, like they wanted to say something but didn't know how. A man across the aisle mouthed, "I'm sorry," without sound. Marcus nodded once. Not forgiveness. Acknowledgement. When the crew returned to their duties, the energy was different. Careful. Soft. Every sir and ma'am landed heavier now. Every smile looked more practiced, more aware. Respect, when it arrives late, always feels like that. Later, a representative from the airline came down the aisle. Quiet. Polite. Nervous in a way power gets when it realizes it's not untouchable. He leaned in, spoke softly, offered compensation. First-class upgrades, travel vouchers, private apologies, all the things money is supposed to fix. Marcus listened. He always listened. Then he shook his head. "No," he said. The man blinked. "Sir, we insist." Marcus met his eyes. Calm, clear. "I don't need to be paid to be treated like a person." The representative hesitated. "Perhaps we could—" Marcus raised his hand gently, not to stop him, to slow him down. "I have one request," he said. The man nodded quickly, eager, ready to agree to anything. "Train your staff to see people before stereotypes." The words were simple. No legal language, no demand for punishment, just a sentence that asked for humanity where policy had failed. The representative swallowed. "We will," he said, and for the first time it sounded like a promise, not a script. The plane eventually pushed back from the gate. Engines came back to life. The familiar hum returned, but it didn't feel the same anymore. The cabin carried the weight of memory now, the kind that doesn't fade when the seatbelt sign turns off. Somewhere, someone uploaded a video. It always happens. The clip spread fast, faster than apologies, faster than truth ever seems to move. Millions watched, Comment sections exploded, opinions hardened, sides were chosen, some defended the attendant, some praised Marcus, some argued about tone, about timing, about whether it had to go that far. Marcus didn't read any of it, because the real moment didn't live online. It lived off camera, in the quiet understanding that settled into a few hearts that day. It lived in the woman who had slapped him, sitting somewhere later, replaying the moment over and over, realizing that authority without empathy is just another kind of violence. It lived in the supervisor who learned that confidence doesn't equal correctness. It lived in the passengers who realized silence has a sound, and it is loud. And it lived in Marcus. As the plane climbed higher, lifting away from the ground, he closed his eyes. Not because he was tired, not because he was relieved, but because something inside him finally loosened, a knot he'd carried for years, the kind tied by 1,000 small moments of disrespect, each one easy to dismiss on its own, impossible to ignore together. He hadn't stood up because he was rich. He hadn't spoken because he had power. He had done it because dignity asked him to. The seatbelt sign dinged off. People shifted. Life moved on. That's how it always goes. But something had changed, because power can slap. It can embarrass, it can humiliate and walk away thinking it's untouchable. But dignity doesn't need volume. It doesn't need fists. It doesn't even need permission. It just needs someone brave enough to stand, stay calm, and say, I am human. And when it does, it always lands last.